Hello Blender heads, and welcome to part 3 of the Motion Capture the Right Way series. In this lesson we're going to be taking two completely different motion capture clips and combining them to make a sweet rolling and shooting sequence. But Jamie, I hear you say, wasn't this only meant to be a two-part series?
Why, what a clever and handsome question, avid viewer. And you'd be quite right. I had only planned on this being a two-part series. And there's two reasons for this new video.
Firstly, I had people in the comments asking, how do you combine different motion capture animations? And considering I had the exact same struggles when I first started using motion capture, particularly when you've got two clips where the character starts and ends in completely different places, so that's going to be the topic of today's lesson. And the second reason is, after the first two videos, the guys at MocapOnline reached out to me. They wanted to let everybody in the Blender community know that they're jumping on the Blender bandwagon. So you can still get their mocap animations in FBX format from their website. If you want to use their animations for Maya or Max or Blender, you still can. But if you head over to Blender Market, you can instead download the same animations in Blender format. There's a couple of small changes to the rig that make retargeting your mocap easier, and importing these animations is now much more streamlined, which is something we'll go over in a moment. They were also generous enough to donate a couple of their rifle shooting mocap clips for me to do this tutorial with. Now, just to be clear, I'm not affiliated with MocapOnline in any way. I'm just really excited to see another big company like this making the move to Blender. So, to be able to combine motion capture animations, we first need a couple of motion capture clips. So, to celebrate MocapOnline joining the Blender juggernaut, I'm going to be using this rifle shooting sequence. Now, don't worry if you personally don't have access to the MocapOnline library. I found a very similar animation on Mixamo, so you can still follow along with this tutorial without actually having to go and buy anything. So from Mixamo, grab this shooting animation if you don't already have the MocapOnline one, and also go and grab this diving rolling animation. I'll make sure that both links to these are in the description below. Since we're using motion capture that has shooting in it, we'll want a rig where the character has a gun. So for this lesson, I'm going to recommend grabbing the Rocket Girl rig by Luciano, aka the Lollipop Man. This rig is free to download, but there is an option to leave a little donation if you're able to. Again, there will be a link in the description. So once you've downloaded all of those files, let's go and open up the Rocket Girl rig. You can see I've got one saved into my project folder here. Now, when you open this particular rig, this particular blend file, it does have its own user interface set up, which personally I'm not a fan of. I like to be able to set up my own user interface. So, hot little tip, if you press the N key, you can bring up this little side panel and click Load UI, uncheck that, so that when I open this file, my user interface doesn't change. So this is the rig that we're going to be using. Let's import our motion capture data. So let's import the Mixamo stuff first. So I'll go import FBX. In my case, I'm just going to be using this running dive roll FBX animation here. You'll possibly also be using the shooting one. In my case, I will be using the MocapOnline for my shooting, and I will show you how to import that in a second. Remember that when you're importing FBX motion capture data, you do need to go down to your armature and check automatic bone rotation, or the bones come in with these weird angles and just looks kind of weird. Import that, and we've already halfway through the animation a little bit here. So let's just rewind that, and you can see that now this animation starts from the 0, and you can see there's our little tuck and roll animation, clearly holding some sort of rifle or gun. So now let's bring in the MocapOnline data. So this is even easier to import. If I just go and find my file in my folder structure, in this case I'm going to be using the w2_stand_fire_powerful_IPC folder file. So all I have to do is drag that in and go append. Now depending on how many of these motion capture clips you're going to be using, depends a little bit on how you're going to bring it in. So in my case, because I know that I'm only using one of these and the other one I'll be using Mixamo, I need to go to the object folder and go to the armature and go append. And if I just hit slash to isolate that, you can see that this is brought in the armature and it's doing its shooting thing. So what's really cool about MocapOnline clips is that once you have an armature in the scene, it becomes really easy to import additional clips. So here in another scene, I have the same shooting clip and I've got the action editor open. So now all I have to do is go to one of my folders and let's drag in this death animation here, and I'll go append, and this time rather than going to object, I'll just go to action and I'll import the action. Now initially it looks like nothing's actually changed, but if we go to our action editor little drop down here, we can now pick between our different animations. So if I click on this, we may need a few more keyframes to be able to see this. But you can see now I immediately have a falling and dropping down dead on his face animation. And I can swap back and forth between these lightning quick. And there's no reason why I can't go and drag in a, here we go, running forward. Let's go and append that again, bring in the action, and I can now swap over to this running animation. Well, it's a running jumping animation. And these now become really, really fast to retarget with Auto Rig Pro. So, back in our original scene, now that we've got both of our pieces of motion capture in here, let me just close off a few of these things so we can see a little bit easier. Now that we've got both of these in our scene, we can start using Auto Rig Pro to attach them to our main rig here. Now, I'm going to be going through this fairly quickly because we've already covered how to do retargeting in part 1. So if you still need a step-by-step on how to make all of this work, jump back to part 1 and go over that there. But I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because we've got a fair bit of stuff to cover. So to start with, I'm just going to go and hide our armature, and we'll just start with our little rolling and jumping animation here. So I might even just leave it there so we can kind of separate these two a little bit. I will go and use this as our source armature. I will grab our actual rig and make this our target armature. I'll quickly hit auto scale. You can see that just pops a tiny little bit there. I will build a bones list. Now, what's really nice about this, if you've followed on in the previous lessons, is that this rig here it's a slightly older version, I believe, but it's still technically the Rigify rig, which means if I come down here and go import, and scroll down a little bit, I can use the remapping Mixamo Rigify IK preset that we created in one of the previous lessons. So if I just go and import that, you can see that that has gone and filled in pretty much all of our target bones. You can see there's a couple of spine bones that are missing here, but that's just because this particular rig has more spine bones than the Rigify rig. So that's really, really fast. That's very cool. So now let's select our motion capture data here and go redefine rest pose. I might just isolate that so it's a little bit easier to see. I will grab the arms and shoulders and then the legs. I'll leave the hands and feet just in this case and go copy those bones and apply them. And now all we need to do, I think we've done everything, just a quick check over, and let's go and retarget. And you can now see that there's our little Space Ranger lady doing her little tuck and roll. That's awesome, that's worked. So let's now go and hide that armature. We will bring back our shooting one. And again, we will go and choose this as the source armature. Do a quick auto scale. You can see it pops ever so slightly there. Now, because this rig is ever so slightly different, it can be a little bit hard to see, particularly when they're overlaying each other like that. But you can see that there's different number of spine bones, and this one has a very, very simple facial rig. I think most of the rest of them are almost identical, but even just those couple of little differences means that we will need to rebuild our bone list. But once again, very, very cool. I can just go import, re-import our preset here, and you can see that once again, it fills all of that in very, very quickly. Now, again, because this is a completely different rig, we will need to redefine the rest pose quickly. So again, I'll just go through and select arms and shoulders and legs and go copy. And for some reason, I'm not quite sure why, this kind of does a little bit of an overlay with the new rest pose and the actual animation, but don't worry, it all still works. Just hit apply, go back out into object mode, and we're ready to retarget. Now, before you go and hit that retarget button, keep in mind that when you do your retarget, it will take all of the data from your current rig, all of this animation data, and it does override it. So we're going to lose all of this. Now, there's two ways that you can kind of go about tackling this. One, if you're planning on using Blender's built-in NLA editor, the non-linear animation editor, then you can come over to your dope sheet and your action editor, and you can push down this animation. That will turn it into an actual action file. It kind of takes all this animation and dumps it into this one little block, and that will allow you to keep this information, retarget your animation, and then you can kind of combine those later. Now, as I've said in previous lessons, I really don't like the NLA editor. I find it very, very confusing. So in our case, I'm going to be using the animations layer. So if you're going to be using animations layers just like I am, go back to the timeline here. All you need to do is go and select all of your keys, all of your controllers, all of your bones. Go down to your timeline, make sure that you've got all of your keyframes selected, and just go copy. You can then delete those. You will lose the animation temporarily, but we now have the ability at any point. You do need to quickly drop in a keyframe on everything and then hit paste, and you can see that we do get that animation back. So I'm just going to undo that until we've got no data. I will now hit the retarget. That goes and loads in our little shooting animation. I'll then go back into pose mode, select everything. I'll just shuffle these across. Let's just shove them right down to about, I don't know, 120 or something. And now when I hit paste, dumps all of those back in, and we can go and line these up. And I will also make sure that we stretch this out so that we've got a good 100 frames. So let's go and hide our armature and let's just let this play through. And you can see that now we do have both pieces of our motion capture data in here. Problem is, fairly obviously, once we get to the end of this piece of motion capture, she snaps back into place over here, and then does her shooting, which is quite obviously not what we want. So to fix this, again, you can use Blender's built-in NLA editor. In my case, I'm going to use the animations layers because I find them much, much easier to work with. So this is where the real lesson begins. Let's jump in and learn how to fix this little popping issue that we've got. Let's start by turning animation layers on, and let's create our first couple of layers here. So again, our base layer has all of our animation in it, including our little popping bit here. So on this first animation layer, I'm going to call this offset, and this is what we're going to use to fix our current little popping issue. So let's just go back to the base layer for a moment, and I need to see that it's 57 and 58. Those are the frames where our popping occurs. And 57 is where we want it to be. So let's jump into pose mode, make sure that I'm on the offset layer. You need to figure out which controllers here are actually driving your animation. So if I grab the hips here, you can see that this moves most of our body, except for the feet. So if I grab both of the feet and give this a little bit of a wiggle, you can see that, good, this is actually controlling our entire character. Now, just be a little bit careful. That works for this rig. Most other rigs that I've used have the hands are also separate. So wiggling the body and the hands would actually stay in place. So most of the time you need hips, hands, and feet. In this case, I just need hips and feet. That's because the hands, now where is this? If I go under the IK parent here, you can see that we've got a whole list of different things, and these are currently parented to the chest. So if I was to grab the chest here and just kind of wiggle that around, you can see that the hands stay connected. Now, just take note of that because later on we will be coming in and changing one of these, and we'll be changing it to none. Just keep that in mind. So at the moment, that's why we don't need to play with the hands. We just need the hips and the feet. So this is the keyframe that we want. Let's just go and hit I and go location, rotation. We probably don't need scale, but I'll keyframe it just in case. So this is the keyframe that we want, and this is the one that we want to override. So I'm going to stay on 57. I'm going to go Control C to copy. Let's just get rid of that so that you can actually see the keyboard shortcuts down here. So Control C and go copy pose. I then go to frame 58 and go paste. And again, keyframe, and I will turn on my auto keyframe so I don't have to keyframe it manually every single time. And you'll now see that as we play this animation, she stays in place. For the most part, there's still a little bit of weird popping here, but you can see that we've fixed this whole translation issue. She doesn't pop back to the origin point here. So that's a huge step in the right direction. Let's see now what we can do about fixing some of these other little bits and pieces. So I will make sure that I stay on my offset layer here. And it looks like it's predominantly the upper body that's causing us issues. So let's go and select the chest here, and let's do exactly what we did before. We want it to be here. Let's add a keyframe, copy the pose, go to the next frame, and hit paste. And you can see that that's again gone a long way, but we've still got a few little issues. And it looks to me, in fact, let's just go and change our viewport display here in front so we can see some of these controllers a little bit better. And this rig does have a lot of controls, so I'm going to go and hide the secondary face, and I'm going to hide the main face too. We don't need that right now. In fact, while we're just working with the main face, I'll point this one out. The eye controller here is not naturally parented to the head. You can fix that by going into your rig controls here and just going eyes follow, and now you can see that we don't have this dead-eyed look. Her eyeballs will actually face forward. So with that done, let's go and hide the main face. And let's figure out which one of these controls still needs to be offset. And it looks to me like it's going to be the neck and the head and the hands. So let's start with those. Again, go and keyframe them, copy that pose, go to the next pose and hit paste. And you can see now that, oh, we're so very close. It looks like it's just these little shoulder controls. So hopefully, one last time, key those, copy the pose, paste the pose, and look at that. We've got everything lining up. There is a little bit of a wiggle in her foot there, but we can fix that later. So let's just play this whole thing through. And you can see that we have now managed to sync these up fairly well. There's still a little bit of cleanup on the actual animation to do, but in terms of actually making this work, hey, we've made this work. Congratulations, you have combined your motion capture. Now there's a lot of little things that we can do to make this animation really pop, and I will give you a bit of a list of those a little bit later on, but there's two main things that we need to do to really sell this animation. That is predominantly, first of all, we need to give her a gun. Obviously, she's kind of holding nothing at the moment. That looks a bit silly. The other main thing that I want to do is this stance that she's got here. I find this really upright, and if you've got a gun that's got that much kind of whiplash to it, and you know that your gun has that much whiplash to it, you wouldn't be standing up that straight. You'd ground yourself a little bit. So let's go back to our animations here and let's lower her hip. So I'm going to go and create a new layer. Let's just call this hip. And to do this, we want to have her by about frame 55 squatting a little bit further down. So I'm going to go and place a keyframe here. I'm also going to go back a little bit and probably as she's starting to come up, so about frame 35, 40, let's go 40, add another keyframe. So this kind of grounds us. It means that everything before this, her hips will stay where they currently are. And once they get to here, they will start to change. So let's go and actually make that change. This is really simple. All I really want to do is lower her to the ground a little bit further. So everything before this keyframe stays the same as it was. As we get to this keyframe, it starts to change and everything after it will stay that little bit lower. So if we just let that play through, you can see that now she has a much stronger stance that she didn't have before. I'm just going to go to the front view here and go, and she kind of gets thrown off balance a little bit there. I might just sort of correct this and just kind of put her over her feet a little bit more. Probably want to do the same thing with the feet. They're a little bit weird. In fact, look, you know what? It's annoying me. Let's also go and make a feet layer. I wasn't planning on doing this, but let's do it. So same idea as with the hips. Let's go with around about 30. We'll keyframe those. And then it's around about, what, around 40, 45, she sort of grounds them. Let's go with 40. So again, let's just shuffle these across a little bit and just kind of widen her stance. We're also going to need to do some work with her knees. Now, you do have a bit of an option here with this rig. You can either grab these controllers, but personally I find them a little bit weird to work with. It's not my preferred method, so I'm going to go to our items here and I'm going to toggle the poles, and you can see that this gives us a little pointer control. And let's just do it with both of those. I'll go back to frame 30, keyframe those, go to frame 40 and keyframe those, and let's just kind of recenter these a little bit. This leg's not nearly as bad. You can see that that looks like a much stronger pose. And unfortunately, introducing these has kind of messed some things up a little bit further backwards. So I may just need to quickly go through these and fix this up. So I'll put a keyframe on frame 1, and let's just make sure that these are always kind of facing where they need to be. So we'll pull this one back. Same here. Just make sure that it's in front of the leg. Okay, that should be alright. There is a little bit of weirdness that kind of goes on. In fact, actually, no, I do feel like this is worth fixing. I know that this particular motion capture, working with this particular rig, kind of the arms and legs, as you can see, they do kind of penetrate a little bit there. That was something that I did spend a little bit of time going over. I'll let you guys go through and fix that yourselves. But I think that that's good enough for our little tech demo here. And you can see that she's got a much stronger stance now. In fact, I reckon that's probably a little bit too wide. So let's just shuffle that back a little bit. And that looks like a fairly strong stance. Alright, I'm going to roll with that. So that's fixed up her hips. And fixed up a couple of little problems with her legs. Let's get this gun into her hands. So to make this work, we're going to need to do a little bit of parenting. We do that over here with our bone constraint properties. So let's go and grab the blaster here. The blaster, that's blaster offset, blaster main. I think in this case we'll be using the blaster offset because that's kind of rotates around the handle. So let's get this facing the right direction. I will rotate this 90 degrees in the Z axis. And on frame 1, I'm just going to go and put this roughly in her hand. Again, you can spend a lot of time on this and make sure that these fingers wrap around properly. Her trigger finger could actually be on the trigger. Again, you can use a different layer to kind of offset all these fingers a little bit. That was something that I did in my final animation. I won't bother doing that here because that's fairly time consuming and it's just kind of going over what we've already gone over. Okay, so I think that's going to be good enough for what we're doing here. So again, on our bone constraints properties, let's go and add a child of constraint. We want the target, the main target here, to actually be the rig because we want to parent it to the hand ultimately. In this case, let me just select the hand. You can see up here, this is called hand underscore IKR. So let's make sure that we go hand underscore IKR, select that. And now you can see as we start to scroll that that gun will stay in her hand the whole time, including once we get to the end. And you can see she shoots it there. Now, one of the problems with this whole setup is that the animations that I've picked, the animations that I had available to me, were all using rifles. These original animations were like designed for, army people. Whereas in the gun that she's got here is very much obviously a little bit more pistol shaped. So you've kind of got two options here. You can either go through, create a new animations layer and kind of just readjust this hand so that it's more suited to a pistol kind of action. That's probably going to take a little bit longer, but if you specifically want a pistol, hey, you can do that. In my case, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and a little bit cheaper. And instead, I'm going to change the gun itself. So let's go and grab this. We'll grab this red part here and we're just going to shove it forward so that it fits into her hand a little bit better. So I'm going to disable the armature so that this snaps it back over here and we can move it on its direct axis a little bit easier. So let's just go front view, jump into wireframe. I want these. I want all of that. And let's just go back to our solid mode. I'm just going to hit Control plus a couple of times until we get to the end of that red segment. Then I'm going to tap G, X, and just shove this forward so it's somewhere about that much longer. You can see we still end up with a little bit of a weird dip here, so I'm also going to select that ring, double tap G, and just kind of spread these out a little bit so that we don't end up with such a strong crease line going through there. And I might even scale this up just a little bit, just so that kind of streamlines in just that little bit better. Whoops, don't need to be in rendered mode. Alright, so let's turn the armature back on and let's go and have a look at this. And you can see that actually fits not too terribly. Let's go to the end of the animation and go, yep, I'm actually pretty happy with that. That sits in there fairly well. So the length that we've done there is pretty good. Now, one final thing that you might notice, particularly as she does her firing here, let's just go through this sort of frame by frame. You can see that her hand doesn't match up very well here. It actually goes through the gun. You can either, again, go through, make a new layer for your hand and kind of animate that, bit by bit. Alternatively, what we can do is let's go and pick a nice frame. Let's just go back to frame 1 actually. It doesn't really matter so much which frame you pick, but instead I'm going to go and line this up myself. Let's go and set that somewhere about there. We might also do the fingers. Oh, in fact, I'm working on the feet layer here. Let's, but I haven't made a new keyframe yet, so that should be okay. So let's just go and create a new layer. You can see that that pops back into place now because we didn't make a keyframe yet. So that's all right. Let's go hand. This time, let's go and make a keyframe. And let's just line this up so that it actually sits underneath the gun, somewhere about there. You can also come in and do all of this with the fingers too if you want to make this line up a little bit better. I'm trying to be quick and maybe a little bit cheap with my animation here, so I'm just going to do it on the hand for now. And you see that that doesn't look too bad. Let's make sure that that's keyframed. Now, let's teach you a little bit more about parenting different things. As we discussed before, this hand is technically parented underneath the chest. So if in this case, what I want is for this hand to stay glued to the blaster. So let's do what we did before. Just a heads up, this is going to break. If I go and add a child of constraint to the hand, I say that I want it to be parented to the rig, and I want it to specifically be parented to the blaster, in this case the blaster main. So if I now go blaster main and parent it, it looks like it's worked. But if we now go forward a few frames, you can see that that hand starts to do some very strange things, and for some reason her armband grows, and oh, it's all bad. So what's going on here is that we're parenting it to the blaster, but it's also already parented to the chest. So because it's double parented, we're getting double transforms. So it's not just moving along with the blaster, it's moving along with the blaster by, X amount, or in this case Y amount, and then it's moving that same distance again with the chest, so it ends up twice as far away as what it should be. So what we need to do is remove this parent. Fortunately, we have the option of setting that to none, so this still won't quite work yet. You can see that on frame 1 it's fine. As we get to the final frame, you can see that it's come loose. That's because we've still got a whole bunch of animation on it, and all of our animation is kind of on different layers. So if I turn this on and off, you can see that it's popping all over the place. The feet probably shouldn't do anything. The hips, yeah, even the hips move it slightly, and the offset is obviously moving it quite a bit. So what we need to do to be able to make this work is to bake all of these layers down. So let's go back to frame 1, just because we know that that's where it's in the right place. Select the topmost layer that you've got here and go merge and bake. And in this case, we will be merging down, and that means that it will take from the top and merge everything underneath it. So let's click OK. And now all of those keyframes have become a single layer. Now this is still going to be broken. You can see once we go here, it's still offset that much. That's because now all of these keyframes are kind of offsetting it ever so slightly. So all we should need to do is go back to frame 1 where we know we've got it where we want it. Because this is now parented, it shouldn't actually move, so it doesn't need all of these additional keyframes. So leave that first keyframe, delete all the others, and now as we scroll through and get to the end here, you can see that it's still in the exact same spot that it was before. So obviously I did a lot more work to make this a final finished piece. I won't go over all of that in detail because it covers a lot of different skills, and this video is really just meant to be about the motion capture. But I will give you a quick overview so you have an idea of where to get some of these assets and how to put all of this together. So all of these cliff and rock assets that you can see in the background here, these all came from the Epic Games Megascan library, and they're freely available. Just double check the license agreement before you start using these in some paid projects. The ground texture here, let's just isolate this so you can see it a little bit better. This here came from CG Bookcase. Again, these assets are free. There is an option to donate via the Patreon page, which gives you access to the Google Drive account, which makes it easy to download the entire library of textures, it's a huge library, very worth a couple of dollars a month. On all of these nodes, the ground and the rocks and everything, I just added a simple little mix node in between the color and the principled BSDF shader. That just allows me to get a little bit of a reddish tinge to everything. kind of makes it look like we're on Mars. I did go through and do a fair bit more work on her animation to make sure that none of her limbs or anything poke through the rest of her body. Her feet now kick out. I went to a bit of effort and made sure to animate all the fingers so that they wrap around the gun a little bit better. I also did just a little bit of facial animation to kind of emphasize the firing of the blaster there and just give it a little bit more emphasis. Speaking of the blaster, I obviously made this little energy ball thing here. Now, that's a pretty simple setup. It is just a sphere with a displacement modifier attached to it. I animated that a little bit. Let's just unanimate that. And then in terms of the shader, it is just a wave texture with a little bit of distortion added to it. Let's just make that a little bit bigger. Plugged into a color ramp and a mix node so that you can come in here and change the colors if you see fit. And then that's just plugged into the base color and the emissions shader. And you can see that I did a little bit of animation on a couple of different things just to kind of give it this pulsating look as it grows. And then finally, I obviously animated the camera to track along with her animation there. And if I just select the camera here, you can see that as she fires the blaster, we get a little bit of camera shake. Again, just to emphasize the power behind that. I rendered everything in Eevee just to save myself a little bit of extra time. The only thing that you really need to have turned on here is the bloom, otherwise you lose the glow. Everything else is kind of optional. It does help with the final output, but it's not necessary. And that's it, people. Big thanks again to MocapOnline for helping out with this tutorial. I'll make sure that there is a link to their Blender market page in the description below. Keep in mind that they haven't converted their entire library yet, but they have converted the mobility pack, which is the one that I have, which has all of their running and walking and cycles and stuff. They've also got the pistols and rifles pack available, which is where this particular animation comes from, and to my mind those couple of packs are probably the most versatile. If I was going to advise you to go and get any of them, I'd probably start with those. There's also a really cool zombie pack if anybody is looking to make the next Left 4 Dead game or a horror film or something. But as usual, peeps, that's all for now, and I will see you in the next one.